Hi, everyone. Welcome back to our second Fossil Friday web chat of the day. I'm Brittany Stoneberg, one of your hosts. I'm the Outreach and Communications Coordinator for the Western Science Center in Hemet. Here with me is Gabriel Santos, the Outreach and Communications Coordinator for the Raymond M. Alf Museum. This is a collaboration between our two museums. And today, our second speaker of the day is Isaac Magallanes. He is a first-year PhD graduate student at the University of Chicago. Thank you for joining us, Isaac.
Hey everyone, how's it going? It's good to be here.
Good to see you, Isaac.
Isaac's here. I'm so happy. Isaac's my best friend, so I'm really, really excited to have everyone meet him and get to learn all about it. It's really cool stuff.
Yes,
I'm
I
really
think we
excited.
know each other.
Yeah.
um, yeah, so Isaac, like I said, is a first year PhD graduate student at the University of Chicago. His research interests include the evolution of marine mammals, such as walruses and whales, and the impact of large scale climatic events on land mammals. During his free time, Isaac enjoys skateboarding, listening to hip hop, reading, and drawing.
Yep.
That's your artwork behind you, right?
Yeah, it's a basically just like Sharpie and then playing around with it on Photoshop. But yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, who
Yeah,
needs fancy Zoom backgrounds when you can make your own?
exactly, right. No, it's really nice to
Excuse
see you
you.
all because it
I'm in the
Yeah.
Millennium Falcon.
yeah. Yeah.
Great. So I'm really excited to hear your talk. And again, to anybody who's listening, feel free to throw any questions you might have for Isaac in the chat. We will do our best to get through all of them when the chat is over. We'll have a very casual Q&A period. And awesome, Isaac, take her away whenever you are ready.
Okay, cool.
Go,
Before I
buddy.
start, I just want to say this is really cool because I'll talk about it in the presentation, but I am a California native, and these are two people that I've known from back home, so it feels like I'm in the room with y'all. So it's really cool. Excited.
See,
All right,
we're
so
all
let me
still
start.
together, even though online. All right,
Pretty
now you can
much.
start.
All right, cool. All right. How's that? All right, cool. So today I'm going to talk about myself, obviously, but also just a couple of my research interests and in a very general way, sort of how I got to be where I am. And a lot of it involves walruses, whales, and education. So a little bit about me. I am Mexican American. I was born to immigrant parents. My father is from Tijuana and my mother is from Mexicali. Those are both border towns on the California and Mexico border. I was born in Santa Ana, Orange County, and that's just south of LA for those of you who don't exactly know where that is. But I was the first person in my family to graduate from university, and I currently live in Chicago, where I attend the University of Chicago. So it's been a long time coming. I graduated in 2011 from high school, so I'm almost coming up on my high school reunion. But it's been fun. Just a little bit about me, some of my personal interests and hobbies. So Gabe already mentioned it, but I really love skateboarding. I started doing it when I was in high school. I'm not always necessarily the best, but I love to have fun, and I think that's the most important thing. I love reading. One of the books that I most recently read that had a big impact on me was the autobiography of Malcolm X. And living in a city like Chicago, where it's rich in history, it was a really awesome read. Highly recommend it. And some of my favorite music. I love music. I love all different types of music, but definitely I would say that the one sort of genre that continuously makes a comeback is hip hop. And these are two of my favorite albums: Wu Tang Forever, which is the second Wu Tang album, and Tribe Called Quest, Low End Theory. Uh, Hip hop has always been really important to me just because when I was a kid, I remember my sister, who is older than me, would drive me to school and we would be listening to the radio, and what was always on the radio was hip hop. So that's just a little bit about me. And throughout my academic, I guess you would call it a career, or throughout my time in school since I graduated from high school, I've been many things in terms of my research and also in terms of the mascots that represent the institutions in which I'm at. I started off as an elephant or a titan at Cal State Fullerton. And when I graduated, I became a gator at the University of Florida in Gainesville. And now I've become the mythical creature known as the Phoenix because that is the University of Chicago's mascot. But I'll start off with my time as an elephant. But before that, I kind of want to talk about just sort of what really gets me interested about science and paleontology in general. So if I had to kind of like give you sort of just the basics of what I'm interested in is it's organisms, it's animals, both living and extinct. I think that life on Earth is one of the most interesting things that one can study, and the many different forms that it takes. I think that when you compare a bug to a whale or a reptile or anything, it looks incredible. You wonder, man, how can all these things sort of be related in some way? Why are they the way they are? And not only why do they look the way they look, but also how do they interact with their environment, right? There's something interesting about the fact that, as humans, we are mammals, but so are whales. And why is it that one is better suited for living in the water and the other is better suited for, giving presentations on the internet? So I'll start off with my time as an undergraduate researcher at Cal State Fullerton, where I was a part of the Titan student body. And the project I worked on when I was in undergrad was a project in which I described a fossil walrus from Southern California. But before I sort of talk about that, I kind of want to talk a little bit about walruses because they were definitely a group of animals that I would not think that I would know a lot about had you told me going into college. But certainly getting out of my undergraduate, it's a group that I ended up knowing a lot about. And they're really interesting because today they're represented by one species. So when you think of the walrus, we think of the walrus, right? The big tusks. They live in the Arctic. They have a highly specialized diet in which they feed exclusively on mollusks. And they're just kind of these really awesome, large, blubbery animals that don't really look like anything else around today, aside from their close relatives, which are seals and sea lions. But even among them, they look drastically different. Now, one of the interesting things I found out during my undergraduate research was that not only have walruses in the past looked different, there were a lot more. So the modern walrus is really just a single representative of a once more diverse group of animals. But on top of there just being a lot of them, they took many different forms. Some had tusks, some had no tusks, some had kind of almost tusks. And on top of looking different, there being a lot more of them, they also lived in a lot of different places. So whereas in the modern walrus is very much restricted to the Arctic, uh, the distribution of fossil walruses is much larger. So we see that they occupy not only the Arctic, but the coast of Japan and North America. They're found all throughout the Northern Pacific. And so that kind of brings us to the specimen that I worked on during my undergraduate, which was this guy right here. This is a artist representation of the walrus that I described. This was done by Justin Santos, who is Gabriel Santos's brother. And so it's a really cool recreation. And this is the fossil that I was working on. So this is Titanataria orangensis. We named it Titanataria orangensis because it was a fossil that was being studied at Cal State Fullerton, where the mascot is a Titan. So we wanted to give a little shout out to the university, and orangensis because it was in Orange County. And as you can see, this walrus looks very different from the modern walrus. This is one of those walruses that you wouldn't necessarily have thought was a walrus if you looked at it just sort of comparing it to the modern walrus. It does have large canines, but they're not necessarily tusks. And the skull isn't as flat or squat as in the modern walrus. And one of the cool things about this specimen was that not only was it sort of a really cool looking skull from Southern California, but it also represents one of the most complete fossil walruses known to date. So for my research project in undergrad, I described the skull, but we also had a lot of postcrania. That's the stuff that comes after the skull, any sort of bony elements after the skull that were included. And about over 90% of the thing was there, which is very rare when you're thinking about sort of preservation. So most fossils that preserve are not entire skeletons, but instead are small parts of an animal, right? So you might get a humerus, or you might get a tooth, or if you're lucky, you might get, it's very rare that you actually get anything that's associated that has so much of the material still there. And one of the cool things that you'll notice here is that we described a good amount of the postcrania, but one of the things that we knew about this walrus going in was that it was a male walrus, and that's because we actually had the baculum here, which is sort of this long for y'all to your left, but it's this very long bone on the left, which is the penis bone. And that was really cool because sometimes when you find some of these fossil pinnipeds, or it's you kind of have to figure out whether it's male or female based off of other skeletal features. But if you have this, it's the smoking gun. You know it's a male. And if you want to know more, I actually published on this in 2018 when I was in my first year into the University of Florida, and it's open access science article, so anyone can download it if you want to learn more. Also, there's a really cool summary on walrus evolution that's kind of spread out over a couple of blog posts that's done by a friend of mine who is named Bobby Bosenecker. I believe he's at the College of Charleston in, I want to say North Carolina, might be South Carolina, but don't quote me. But follow this link. He's got a lot of really cool stuff, not just on walruses, but also on all other types of pinnipeds and whales as well. So that was my time as an undergrad. Kind of moving on forward, I was very much still interested in continuing my research in marine mammals, but I kind of shifted gears when I got to my master's research. So during my time as a gator, instead of working in a collection, or rather, instead of primarily working in a laboratory at my university, I did a little bit of field work. And I did my field work in New Mexico. And so this is a really cool photo I took of some of the areas in which I was collecting fossils. And whereas in my undergrad, I was focused on sort of understanding a particular group of animals, very much just looking at walruses. For my master's research, I actually shifted gears, and instead of looking at one group of animals, I looked at a whole community of animals. So my research focused on the north central region of New Mexico. I was looking at fossils that were around 18.9 to 6.75 million years in age. And again, I was not just focusing on one group of animals, but a whole community. So I was particularly focused on the herbivorous animals, so the plant eaters. And I was looking at dietary preference. The types of animals that I was looking at were horses, oreodonts, antilocaprids, gomphotheres, which are sort of elephant-like animals, camelids, and rhinos. And I thought that one of the cool things about this project was not just that there was a lot of really cool fossils, a really cool location, but also that they showed a very interesting story here in North America, in which these are not necessarily animals that we think of making up sort of the animal communities that we see in this area today. So it gives you a very good representation, sort of like what North America was like in the past versus what it's like now. And based off of my findings, I found that there were a diversity of feeding behaviors that included not only different animals, but those animals were feeding in different ways. Some were grazing, feeding on grasses. Others were mixed feeders, incorporating not just grasses, but also trees and shrubs. And some were exclusively feeding on sort of trees and shrubs. And it was awesome because I think that one of the powerful things about paleontology is sort of being able to string together all these different lines of evidence to tell a bigger story. And not only did I know what types of animals were there, but based on those types of animals, I could tell a little bit about what the environment looked like. So I knew that there were trees, shrubs, and grasses. I knew that the environment was similar to the Great Plains regions that we found and that you find here in North America during that same time, as well as the California coastal ranges. So there was a lot of information that could be sort of learned, not just by there's a lot of information that came from, fossils, which is obviously one of the greatest things about paleontology. And now that takes me to my PhD research, and that's something that's still kind of forming. One of the great things about being a graduate student is that you continue learning. You continue learning more about things you're interested in, and for my PhD research, I'm kind of starting to circle back to I think what I would consider sort of my first love, being marine mammals, specifically whales. When I was a kid, I used to love playing with toy whales. My dad worked at a swap meet, and so he would often have the vendors there give him things, oh, here, go give this to your kids to let them have some fun. And my dad accumulated this huge collection of like toy plastic whales, and he would bring them home to me. And I just remember being really, really, really excited about whales. And so now that I'm in my PhD, I get to study them, and I get to kind of learn more about not just the group as a whole, but specific things and how they've evolved through time. And one of the things I'm interested in is learning to see if there's ways to estimate brain size, not only in modern whales, but also in fossil whales, using external skull measurements. So if you measure particular parts of the skull, can you sort of, using some math equations, figure out ways to tell how big the brain was? And then looking at how that relationship between brain size and body size is, because one of the interesting things about whales is that they get really big. And in particular, baleen whales get huge. So as an animal is getting bigger, basically everything is getting bigger, right? But at some point, that relationship between brain size and body size seems to decouple because whales keep getting bigger, but their brains, not that they're saying that they're not getting bigger, but I'm just interested in seeing sort of what that relationship looks like. And then understanding the rate and tempo of that evolution and as how these two features sort of relate to each other. These are things that I'm still learning. I'm talking to people in the field. I'm talking to my colleagues, some of my friends. I'm just trying to know more because it's an area of research that I'm very much still curious in. But those are basically what I've done throughout my academic career. I've had a lot of fun. I've gotten to do a lot of travel. I've gotten to meet a lot of great people, including present company. So I met Gabe at Cal State Fullerton through one of my first collections trips. I met Brittany through Gabe, and we've been good friends ever since. It's a lot of really cool people. It's a lot of really interesting things, and you know, I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to be talking to everyone, and sort of if anyone has any interesting questions about what I've talked about, things I've done, uh, yeah, that's kind of the end for this presentation, at least the formal part. But I'm excited to talk to everyone.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Isaac.
Yeah, no problem.
Nice. Ah, Titanotarea. That brings back memories.
Yeah, that was a long time, huh? That took
I
4 years,
know.
something like
I
that.
still remember when we went to San Diego to like do all those scans and stuff, and even remember trying to 3D scan the skull of Titanotarea. It took like a few weeks to do.
We were very scared because the 3D scanner we were using kept choking because we were putting so much data. Like we were using it a lot, but remember the computer kept choking on it. And I think we were like it was the very last day. We had like 2 or 3 hours, and there was one skull that was taking forever to do. Our machine would start up and then choke, and start up and choke. Um, I remember that. It was really fun though.
Yeah.
That was a really great trip. That was one of our first times traveling uh, with the Parham Lab, right?
Yeah.
That was
Well,
my with
no,
our
no, no. That
undergrad.
was like a little bit later, but it still was like one of the first times we went somewhere else for like research.
Yeah, I remember I was super excited because prior to that, the only museum I'd been to was the LACM, and I actually didn't go there until I was like 19. And that was with you,
Really?
Gabe. Yeah, that was with you, Gabe. You told me. I remember you were talking to me, and you were like, "Hey, have you been to LACM?" And I was like, "No, I've never been." You're like, "You lived in California all your life, or Southern California. How have you never been there?" I was like, "Oh no, it's just where when I was growing up, it wasn't necessarily something that was like on the menu in terms of things to do on a weekend. My parents were normally, um, you know, either they had to work in the weekends or it was like, let's take the kids to the park. We lived just far enough from LA that it wasn't always in sight.
I mean, that's a thing for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
We take it for granted that we have easy access to museums sometimes, but for a lot of people, the nearest museum is hours away, if even that. And the fact that it's not accessible for some because it's expensive for some people,
Mm-hmm.
and things like that. So
Which
sometimes
I
we, yeah,
which I also think speaks to like the importance of regional museums, like our museums. Hemet is can be up to 2 hours away from Los Angeles, and so when if people are only familiar with these larger museums that are in major centers, they may not realize the kind of resources they have. Like, they can find a museum in Claremont, they can find a museum in Hemet, and they don't have to go so far in order to find accessible science.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny because my first exposure to science really came through. I mean, obviously school, but when I was in school, I wasn't really. When I was in high school, at least, I wasn't really good at science, and I wasn't really good in middle school or elementary school. It's something that I kind of came to later on in life. But I remember my first exposure to even seeing, like a dinosaur fossil or a skeleton in a picture was through like books at the library. And it's interesting now that one of the things that we do with our museum collections is we do like pop-up museums where we go visit sort of community centers. We go bring the museum to the public instead of waiting for the public to come to us. Obviously, like if you live in a place or you work with a collection where that's something that is possible, like if you're at the LACM, at the Western Science Center, at Alf or at the field, yeah, you have all this space and all this funding for like really big exhibits. But for someone like me, who growing up just didn't know that was an option, or my parents weren't aware that that was an option, I would have really appreciated like, oh, come to the library and there will be a scientist talking there and he's going to show fossils. It just wasn't a thing when I was growing up in Anaheim. But now that we get to do it, I frequently think of that because I did some pop-up museum stuff with the University of Florida, and I've done it with the Alf. I've also done it with in connection with the Western Science Center as well. And every time I'm doing one of those, I just think I'm like, man, that would have been really cool if I was a kid at this, and had someone coming and showing me like, oh, look at this fossil. I would have been like, word, that's really crazy. But
I
yeah.
mean, that's why we started Cosplay for Science, right? For those of you who don't know, Isaac is also a founding member of the Cosplay for Science initiative. We like to cosplay and use pop culture storytelling to tell science stories.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, because I think that one of the things for a lot of people is that you know, pop culture is one of the ways that you kind of are introduced to science, and it's not like reading a science article. You're kind of introduced to like entertainment first, and if you have science in there, it leaves an impression. And so for me, for those of you who don't know, Gabe is a very big Star Wars fan, and he
Really?
and
I don't
I
have to
we
be able
first
to tell right
connected.
now.
Right, yeah. He and I first connected over our love for comic books and Star Wars. Um, and for me, that was another like way that I fed my interest in science. It was through Star Wars. It was through Jurassic Park. It was through reading comic books. Certainly, like my mom would take me to the library, and I'd, be like, "Oh, mom, I want to go get that book on dinosaurs again because it's just really interesting," or I want to check out this movie in their collections. But I mean, pop culture played a huge part for me, at least. And it was really how I sort of started making connections initially to science was through, um, you know, through what I enjoyed consuming in terms of entertainment.
Another reason to support your local libraries.
Yeah, and another reason to sort of check out and see what Cosplay for Science is doing because they do some really cool stuff. Um, you also get to see us dress up every now and then. Brittany and Gabe do it more so than I do, but I think there's even a couple photos of me there and
He
dressed up
definitely
as a rebel
I think the
spy.
first one you did with us, like the first official one you did with us, was when we all went to Disneyland and we did the Wilderness Explorer Day. We're all dressed up as wilderness
Yeah,
explorers going through the park.
Yep.
that was actually the first time I met Brittany, wasn't it?
Mhm.
Yeah, that was the first time I met you, Brittany. Yeah,
That was a couple years
What?
ago now.
Disneyland's not a bad way to see to like meet them for the first time.
This is very true.
Yeah,
So we have some questions about your talk. So I'm going to field a couple of those. First up is from Brett, and hi Brett. She's actually my coworker at the Western Science Center.
cool.
When in the modern lineage of walruses did they become specialized mollusk eaters?
So fairly recently, let me look up sort of my paper here really quick. It's been a while since I've looked at it, but it was fairly recently. So actually, most throughout most of their evolutionary history, walruses were sort of generalist feeders, feeding very much in the way that you see like seals or sea lions rather feed, just kind of sucking animals into their mouth. But it wasn't until I want to say like the last 2 million years that they started obliquely suction feeding. But let me double check that. But that was one of the things that I found really interesting about them. So yeah, maybe like within like the last like roughly around the last 7 million years is when you started seeing suction feeding becoming
Cool.
a common way of them feeding. And it's one of the really interesting things because that sort of way in which they feed is a lot of the reason why their rostrum or their snout looks the way it does. Because if you're kind of sifting through, substrate, you don't really want a long snout. You want something a little shorter, I imagine. Yeah.
Cool. I did not know that.
I did.
Yes, well, you also study marine mammals, so I'm the
Gabe
odd
was
one
on
out. I'm the odd one out in this trio.
Gabe was on Team Titanitaria.
Yeah.
He's a co-author on that paper. So if you see his name there, it's not just because I like him.
I'm gonna stick around with my land mammals. Thank you very much. My horses and
And
all.
the water's fine.
Oh man, one day, hopefully, we'll see. Here's another good question. Are there any theories, and this is from Jim, are there any theories about why we went from so many species of walruses in the past to just a single species now? Were there significant climatic changes that led to a decrease in diversity?
Yeah, so that's actually one of the things that we were that I was interested in was seeing sort of what was one of the reasons why um, we went from having so many species of walrus to basically the point where we are today, where there's only one, and a lot of it had to do with sort of changing climate, reducing the amount of space that they might have been feeding on. And yeah, so basically like a reduction in their feeding zone, what we sort of shallow marine. Whoa, I just did something weird with my screen. But yeah, a reduction in their feeding zones where they were eating had a lot to do with it. That was driven by climate, so changing ocean circulation. Um, during the Pleistocene, you have sort of these major climatic shifts that are happening.
It's happen a lot with a lot of animals. Like when I think about proboscideans, so
Mhm.
elephants, we have two, three species of elephants now, and when you look at their evolutionary history, it was so much more varied. And now we've just kind of shrunken down.
Definitely.
Here's a nice question. This is from Bailey. We all know Bailey. Uh, when did you first know that paleontology was for you?
Uh, it came later for sure. I mean, so it's always cool. I think whenever I hear stories of like, I knew I wanted to be a scientist from a very young age, and I think I was always interested in science. It was something that was always like, I thought that it was just a cool job. I mean, when I was a kid, like it was like, oh, Bill Nye, like you just get to sit around a room with like a giant coat and mix chemicals together. That's really cool. That's what I thought science was, and I didn't even necessarily know that like paleontology was a part of science. But I knew I wanted to be a paleontologist when I was at Cal State Fullerton, and a lot of it actually came
Titans.
from yeah, go Titans. A lot of it came from a class I took, which was Geology 101. So I'd always had a general interest in sort of prehistory and looking at ancient life, looking at dinosaurs and whatnot. But I remember taking a Geology 101 class with a professor who would end up becoming my undergraduate advisor, and he's a really great guy. A guy named James Parham, Jim Parham, we call him. And
Go Jim.
yeah, go Team Jim. Uh, he uh, he taught the course um, using a lot of examples of ancient life in Orange County, which was something that I just, it's funny, I'm from Orange County. I've lived there all my life, but I never even knew that there were fossils there. Like I remember like learning in this class, like, oh my gosh, there are fossils here in Orange County. Not only are there some fossils, there's a lot of fossils. And not only are there a lot of fossils, but they're fossils that represent a diverse, like, diverse communities. There's all types of animals. It's not just land animals. There's also animals that are coming from the sea. Uh, Orange County has a very dynamic history, and it was just something that I had no idea of. And I would say that it was in that 101 class where I became very much interested in paleontology. And then afterwards, uh, Jim offered up a opportunity to work with fossils. Um, all I was doing was just basically cleaning them up. I was preparing fossils, and
For my
which is
master's thesis.
yeah for Gabe's master's actually, and actually like preparing fossils is awesome. People who prepare fossils are the best. Um, and that's all I was doing for a semester after taking this geology 101 course, and it was in that semester that I basically decided like I think this is something I want to pursue, and I ended up talking to Jim afterwards. I was like, hey Jim, it was a combination of us kind of talking to each other rather, and he certainly like was obviously was pushing me in that direction because he could see that I was interested in. But yeah, it was just it was in undergrad, and again, even though I came into it a little later, once I was hooked, I was hooked, and through it. Again, I've met awesome people. And yeah, Jim Jim did a lot for me. That was really cool.
We all of us in the Parm Lab owe a lot to Jim. He
Yeah, he's a
really
cool
got
guy.
us to where we are.
Yeah.
Yeah, we are all either former or current at the moment CS2 Fullerton Titans in this chat. So
Yeah. That's very cool. Cal State Fullerton's a very like unassuming, for me at least. I don't know about other people, but like when I first like, cause I lived down the street from Cal State Fullerton throughout all of high school. I had no idea that there were people there that were studying like ancient life and were studying like how the earth is the way it is today. And there's all these cool bio projects and all these really cool programs. People in environmental are doing really cool things. It was just, yeah, like I never would have known that like this, all these really cool opportunities are like literally just like down the street. And my high school actually was, I want to say like a 10-minute walk from Cal State Fullerton. Yeah.
That was like a
Kind
that's like a big thing of what you said earlier, how like you didn't know any of these, or like when Jim was talking about it in his class, he used a lot of local examples. For
yeah.
like me too, like I had no idea that there was so much paleontology in Southern California until I started working at the Cooper Center and going to Cal State Fullerton. And like I always thought paleontology was somewhere like out far away, like in the desert or like in Montana or Mongolia or something. And then to find out that paleontology is, there's so much great paleontology in California, which is awesome. Is and like
Mhm.
I still use that a lot today, and I know you do too, Brittany, at your
mhm.
museum. Like we like to really inspire and show people that paleontology is like everywhere.
Yeah, like the Western Science Center now has a field site in New Mexico, but prior to that, um, our the majority of our collection was from where the museum sits at Diamond Valley Lake. It's a very, very regional collection. And yeah, I do think there is this little bit of an idea that, you have to go out into the desert somewhere hundreds of miles away in order to find fossils. And it's really, in my position at the museum, it's really cool to be able to talk to people who come in, and when they ask, they're like, so wait, this is from here? I'm like, yes, these are animals that would have been in your own backyard had you been here 50,000 years ago. And they have no idea. They have no idea that mastodons, mammoths, other ice age animals were roaming around um, these areas, and that California actually has a really rich fossil history of all sorts. My field site for what I study is in San Bernardino National Forest, and it's a bunch of little horses. And people have no idea that there's these 18 million year old horses, just up the street when they're trying to drive to Las Vegas. So it's this really cool opportunity to really localize science for people and kind of make them realize like this is happening where you live. It's not something that's far away.
Yeah. And it's really cool because when I was at the University of Florida, that was a lot of what we did. We used a lot of like a lot of examples of sort of this is in your backyard, and it really helps the community connect with their own natural history. Kind of, I think in the same way that like for those of you who like sports, in the same way that like a sports team, a local sports team can help you have sort of pride in your community and where you come from. Knowing things about the natural history, and places you grew up, I think also does the same thing. That's what this course did for me. I mean, knowing that there were all types of cool animals living in Orange County in the past was just, it made me like, I was like, man, like, Orange County is really cool. And for reasons other than, the beaches and the theme parks and whatnot. I mean, those things are all great, but if you can't afford to do those things, it very much is hard to connect with it. But something like natural history, I mean, natural history belongs to all of us. This is a part of our story. I very much consider the natural history in Orange County a part of, even though it wasn't necessarily a part of like my younger experiences, it still is a part of sort of my experiences so far. When I think of Orange County, I don't just think of those other things I mentioned, but I also think of like, no, Orange County's got really cool stuff too. If you want to see some cool fossils that come from Orange County, go check out go check out some cool museums. Yeah.
Yeah. On the sports note, somebody in the chat when they heard you were from Anaheim put in "Go Angels," which I
That's
agree
right.
with because
Right.
I was born in Buena. I'm from Buena Park originally, so yes, go Angels.
Hey, Buena Park.
Uh,
Yeah.
Yeah, go sports.
Here's another great question. This is from Cam. Can you explain how the geology of where you were working had an impact on the fossils that you found there? What's the preservation bias like?
Are you talking about what I did in New Mexico?
Let's go with that one. I think that's the one he's speaking about.
Yeah, so a lot of what we found in New Mexico were teeth. A lot of the stuff. So it was a combination of fieldwork and collections work. So when I was in New Mexico, the majority of the samples that I was sampling, or the majority of the specimens I was sampling from, were from uh, land mammal teeth that were found in the area. And then afterwards, I came in and added a couple more to my study. But a lot of them were basically teeth. And the reason being is that uh, enamel is the hardest substance in an organism's body, and often whereas sort of less hardy bone that is porous can break apart, it can dissociate, it can be pulverized. Once animals die, all types of things happen to their bodies. But teeth often hold up very, very well. And because they hold up very well, a lot of the fossil record is actually, made up of teeth. Um, and in the areas that I was studying, a lot of the teeth that I was sampling from were actually horse teeth. And one of the reasons is that if you look at a horse tooth, they're very well, depending on the type of horse you're looking at. The types of horses that I was looking at have very, very long teeth. So if you have just this very you know, if you have a very hardy thick piece of bone that's covered in enamel, it's going to last longer. And so in terms of preservation bias, I mean, that was the majority of what I got about what I was looking at. But that doesn't mean that it was the only thing that was preserved. It just means that it was the thing that was more readily preserved. There were also lots of samples that were coming from gomphotheres, which are sort of these elephant-like animals that have giant shovel tusks. And it's interesting because I'm talking about the horse, sometimes an entire tooth, and that's really cool. And the probability of you getting a giant tooth is, higher than if you getting like a giant sort of gomphothere tooth. But we did get gomphothere teeth, and often they were flakes or they were parts of a tooth. So sometimes, when you're looking at when you're collecting fossils in a site, you start noticing that you have more of one thing versus the other, and you sort of start piecing together. Some of it is going to have to do with preservation bias, but some of it also might reflect sort of the proportions of animals living in a community. So there might be more horses in a community than there are gomphotheres, but that's something you have to think about a little more. And it's not, you know, in terms of preservation bias, that's yeah. I mean, teeth were the big thing, and I would say I had a lot of horse teeth, and stuff of everything else, but mostly it was all horse teeth. Yeah.
You know what it's like to find mostly horse teeth.
Yeah.
Here's a good question. This is from Rob, our friend Rob Soto. Is there evidence? Is there evidence of the environmental pressures that pushed walruses to develop tusks?
Yeah. So, well, can you ask the question again? Sorry.
No worries.
I thought about it and then it just kind of went away.
Do you need to phone a friend?
Is there evidence of the environmental pressures that pushed walruses to develop tusks?
That push walruses to develop tusks. So one of the interesting things about walruses, right, is that they have this very unique morphology that's associated with how they feed. And in terms of environment, as you start sort of changing, as sort of shallow marine zones start going away, you have a lot of the other walruses that were sort of more generalist feeders. They start disappearing. And at the time that they're disappearing, you're also starting to see other groups of pinnipeds sort of become more abundant or become more common that are also generalist feeders. So there's this idea that there may have been some sort of competition going on, and that it might not necessarily be that they're being driven towards a particular morphology, but as competition is happening, those that are having to compete is kind of going, they're kind of either losing out to these other groups of pinnipeds, and then the ones that are staying are the ones that are sort of in more I guess what you might consider like extreme conditions. They're further up north. There might not be as many other pinnipeds up there. Um, so I don't know if that necessarily answers the question, but yeah.
Really quick, if Rob, if you want to look at some really cool walruses with weird tusks, look up Gomphitaria. It's this walrus that had four tusks, two underneath and two on top, and they kind of like crossed like that. It's a really, really weird, crazy walrus. If you want to look up some weird tusks.
That is strange. All right. Let me see. We've got quite a few good questions here.
Cool.
Francesca is asking, so it looks like you were planning to do field work in China this summer.
Yeah.
She's asking, since you won't, with what's going on in the world right now, you won't be able to do that. Do you plan to do more of that in the future?
I would like to. Obviously, with everything that's going on, things are kind of up in the air. Obviously, I would love to. I would love to have been able to do that, but given the current situation, it's not possible. Um, I would love to continue doing more field work. I've done field work for basically all of my throughout all my academic career, and whether it's been through a class I've been taking, or um, it's been through sort of an internship. So when I was in undergrad in 2015, I did field work in Panama, where I was actually digging for fossils in the canal, and that was a really awesome opportunity. When I was in my master's, I obviously did field work in New Mexico and did some field work in Florida. I would love to continue traveling, and as I'm sort of moving forward, I think that I'm going to always try to find a way to incorporate it. But as of right now, just kind of staying, just kind of hunkering down, and just kind of waiting for the whole situation to blow over. But it's one of the funnest things about being a paleontologist. Getting to travel is something that I didn't think I would do when I was growing up. Along with going to a museum when I was 19 years old for the first time I ever went on an airplane was with Gabe, and that was in 2014. Was it?
Yeah, that's for SecAd, for SecAd
Yeah.
Washington, D.C., the Secondary Adaptations of Aquatic Tetrapods Conference, where we talked about
Rolls off the tongue.
walruses.
Yeah. Right.
You talked about walruses, I talked about Desmostilians.
Yeah.
That's what it was.
Yeah, that was actually my first scientific presentation, and I think I don't want to assume, but I think where a lot of people do like a poster presentation for their first presentation. Um, I was asked to do or not asked, but I was recommended to do an actual talk of like a 12 or 15-minute talk, and it was fun. But a lot of it I was like, ooh, this is crazy. But yeah, that was the first time I ever traveled, and so I'd like to keep that trend up, but we'll just see.
I think
Right now I'm kind of just trying to figure out sort of what my dissertation ideas are going to be, and I'm starting to focus in on whales, but I'm trying to see how I'm going to fit in fieldwork to that.
If I recall correctly, you handled the plane ride just fine, right? Did you have
Somewhat,
a panic
yeah.
attack? I don't remember. I'm just kidding.
No, I didn't have a panic attack, but there was definitely once you're in the air, it's fine.
Yeah.
Like once you're in, I've been on a Greyhound bus. Like it's kind of like that, except you look out the window. You're up in the air. For me, at least, I kind of forgot I was, like however many, hundreds or thousands of feet up.
Yeah.
But it's takeoff and landing. I still get nervous when we land, but takeoff was like, I just remember being very much like.
No, I remember you were like in the seat like this, and I was on my phone just looking for music, and I looked over. I was like,
yeah, man.
Okay.
I know how it is, Isaac. I didn't fly for the first time until I was like 18, 19. So I was just, what is this?
It's scary out there.
Yeah.
If you're not used to it, it's scary. Yeah.
But I think we're all missing field work right now.
Yeah, definitely. But we just need to be responsible and let this thing pass and do the best we can to not be a problem.
I have managed not to dig any holes in my backyard.
That's
That's
good.
what Animal Crossing's for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Here's a question from Niobe, and Niobe, I'm sorry if I've mispronounced that. How diverse were the ancestors of sperm whales?
Really, so more diverse than today. So whereas in today we have the sperm whale, and then we have the pygmy sperm whale. I know that there's been more sperm whales in the past. I actually don't know too much about them, but when I was in Panama, there was this really big
Are you talking about Leviathan?
yes.
Yeah, that's from Peru.
It's from yeah. Well, so when I was in Panama, they had a poster for Leviathan because I guess it was a part of like some conference or some like uh, some symposium they had down there, and they had this huge poster of Leviathan. I just remember being like, "Oh my gosh, that thing looks scary," because it's got these teeth that just look absolutely
They're like
ferocious.
this big, right? If I
Oh
recall,
yeah, and this
they're
is one of them.
huge.
Yeah, so just it's one of them. So imagine if you had a whole mouthful of those, the animal that would have to accommodate that. But yeah, I mean they were much more diverse. I don't know too much about sperm whales, but they're really cool. And as a kid, I was very much fascinated by them.
Yeah, if you want to look up about this giant, crazy predatory sperm whale from South America, it's called Leviathan, Livyatan. I think it's
Yeah,
not
yeah,
Leviathan, but it's like
yeah,
spelled like it sounds like that. But look it
yeah.
up; it's really cool and really crazy. And I actually got to go to that site when I was in Peru, and the whole time I was just like, find another, find another.
Did
My
you? Oh, sorry,
no, I was just gonna say my boss, Dr. Alton Dooley, who's watching the stream. Hi, boss.
Kelton.
Just contacted me to say they were, I quote, crazy diverse.
Nice. Yeah, that's what I would assume. Yeah,
Like, for everybody's context, my our director of the Western Science Center studied whales for a long time. So
Thanks, Alton.
I
just
gotta learn more about them. They're really cool. They're really cool group of animals.
here's another good question. Do you have any reading recommendations that have a focus on ancient marine mammals?
Um, aside from like scientific articles,
Let's go with that. I'm not. They didn't specify, so
Do you remember the name of Annalisa Berta's book? I can't open my internet right now because I'm streaming the thing, but
yeah. I've looked a lot at like the encyclo. I think it's called the Encyclopedia of Marine Mammals. Um, and it's kind of a really nice general read, but a lot of what I look at tend to be like scientific articles. And usually when as far as like the stuff I like to read for fun, it tends to be more like sort of you know fiction or like nonfiction historical stuff. But yeah, sorry about that.
oh, no worries. Let's
if you
see.
can go on Amazon or any bookseller and look up, it's a marine mammal book by Dr. Annalisa Berta. It's a pretty good book that I remember reading when I was starting to learn about marine mammals. So if you can find that
Like from
one,
the
I can't
land to
remember
the
the name
sea.
of the title right now. What was it?
Is it from the land to the sea? Is it like talking about the transition? I
I
just don't
can't
know if that's on.
remember.
Yeah,
But yeah,
Okay.
there's some good ones online.
yeah.
There's a couple more questions, so I'm going to do my best to get through some of them. If we don't get through all of them, we may be able to answer some of them in the chat. Um, here's one from Lisa. I've heard about the fossils dug up in the LA subway construction project. Are sea mammals among those?
Uh,
I think
so
Myself.
was it
I
was it
think
like
they're all
mammal?
Pleistocene stuff.
Was it?
I think it's all La Brea stuff.
It's
Okay,
like,
so if I remember correctly, that's what I thought it was. That's what I thought I had been reading.
yeah. So as far as I know, perhaps I do know a few people who work on the project and we can look more into this, but as far as I know, it's all been reported as Pleistocene mammals. Cool. Okay, here's a good one from our friend Nick Famoso. Of all the critters you've worked on, do you have a favorite and why?
Um, well, I mean, my first project will always be one that's just like it's very close and dear to my heart. So I would say, in terms of like a specific organism, Titanitaria is always going to be sort of a very fond memory because it was. I mean, it took up 4 years. I had the privilege of working on it for that long, and I worked with amazing people. But um, when I was a kid, like I said, I loved whales. Um, and it's funny, I was talking to my mom recently, and she was telling me that one of the things I used to do was I would paint murals without being asked to behind the sofa in the living room. And often, and often what I would paint were like these just an ocean with a bunch of whales in it. And so she would tell me often that like, yeah, you were just we couldn't get you to stop. Like you'd grab a couple crayons, disappear, and when you're around kids and like you don't hear them, that's when you got to worry. Yeah, that was what I would do. I would just be quiet and just be drawing and sort of making my Sistine Chapel behind the sofa, and I would draw a bunch of whales. And when I was a kid, my mom said that like, hey, if I were to ask you like how old you were, you wouldn't tell me you were 5 years old. You'd be like, I'm 5 whales old. That was my unit of measurement at the time. Um, so I would say like as far as like I absolutely love my first project. But if we're talking about a group of animals, I mean whales are just the coolest. You know, when I was a kid, I was just a sucker for orcas. I thought that humpback whales were super cool. Yeah, so I'd say yeah, whales.
I'm gonna ask your mom if she has any pictures of those murals. I want to see them.
She might have them. She might have them. My dad might have taken like a Polaroid or something of those.
Alrighty, here's another question. And again, I apologize if I do not pronounce this name correctly. This is by Aiden, 17 years old. When did whales evolve into filter eaters? Filter feeders.
So I don't exactly remember the timing of it, but I do know that one of the things that's really interesting is that the question is sort of how, or one of the questions is very interesting about them becoming filter feeders is that, did they go straight from teeth? Because teeth are sort of the ancestral state, right? So from teeth, you develop the filter feeding mechanism, which is baleen. And one of the interesting things is that, like, was it a sort of a dramatic step in which you had teeth and then bam, you just didn't have them at all, or was there some in between? And and when they were able to filter feed, like, is that one of the things that allowed them to get so big because they were consuming, or they had the ability to consume so much food? And there's a couple different hypotheses. I mean, yeah, some hypotheses say that yeah, they went straight from teeth to baleen, but there's others that look at sort of these things known as tooth mysticetes. And so mysticetes are they're the group that include the baleen whales. But if you look at their earliest, sort of the earliest members of that group, they actually had teeth. And in some cases, if you look at the roof of their mouth, they have these sort of grooves where it's thought that baleen plates, that so that baleen being the filter apparatus, could have been there. So there may have been this intermediate step in which they transitioned from sort of being more generalist feeders where they had teeth to being filter feeders. Yeah.
Cool. Possible. Great questions, everyone.
Yeah.
Cool. So I think that's all the questions that we had. Did you want to speak on a little bit while we still have time? We're coming up at the end of our talk here, but if you'd like to chat a little.
So, like I mentioned it already in this talk, but one of the things that is really close to my heart is including education into my projects. And when I was in Cal State Fullerton, I was involved in a lot of education outreach events. I would go with the Cooper Center, which was the fossil repository in Orange County. At the time, I would go with them to go talking at the Boys and Girls Club, or we go talk at the library, or we would have these big events called Prehistoric OC where our lab, Jim Parham's lab, would come and present everything that we were doing. We'd bring out actual fossils or 3D prints to talk about it. And then when I was at the University of Florida, I was working with teachers. I was working to help develop lesson plans with some of my friends. We would, or not me, but I have a friend who's still doing a lot of work at the University of Florida, a guy named Michael Ziegler. I don't know if he's in this string of talks, but he might talk about some of that stuff if he is. But all throughout it, one of the things that's been very important to me is that, I didn't grow up with a lot of access to museums. And because of that, I think that's one of the reasons why I maybe didn't come into paleontology earlier. I didn't see myself being a paleontologist earlier. So now that I have the opportunity to, I'm very much passionate and interested in continuing to do that kind of work, working with underrepresented groups in science and helping students sort of get that initial exposure. Because I think that's a lot about what's sort of difficult is if you aren't exposed to it, you don't know it's there and you don't know it's a possibility. And certainly museums can be a big part of that, right? So if you're not near a museum, you might not never know that, oh, there's these really cool things that, there's these really cool fossils out there, and then maybe I can look at them. But so there's that aspect, but there's also representation, I think, which is extremely important. So um, when I was a kid, there wasn't a lot of people who looked like me, who were Mexican American, or people of color who were doing science, or there might have been, but I just didn't know about them. And so that was another reason why I think, growing up, I just didn't. It's not that it's not that I didn't think that I couldn't be a scientist, but I just didn't know it was an option. And so now that I'm in the position where I'm at now, where I'm getting the opportunity to travel, I'm getting the opportunity to do a lot of really cool stuff, meet really cool people who are doing really cool things, I feel a desire and responsibility to give back and to continue working with education, on education and outreach projects where I get to talk to the community and um, you know share all the really cool things that I've been doing, everything that I've enjoyed about being a scientist and about going to college and doing a PhD. That's all things that I think, anyone who's interested in should have the opportunity to check it out or to know someone who's doing it. And so I want to share as much as I can. I want to share what I'm doing. I want to share what uh, the help that was given to me. I want to give that out too. You know,
Well, it definitely seems like you're doing that.
Working
We
on it.
know firsthand that you're doing that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one of the things that all of us in our friend group do, is like think that's one of our connecting dots, is like we're all very passionate about education and really sharing the opportunities we've been given or that we've had the privilege of to share it with other people. Like that's why we do cosplay for science and the things like that, and just going out there and really connecting to people as paleontologists. We're not just people, behind the scenes of museums or whatever. We're all people who have likes and interests that we can connect to and show them that. How does that thing go in Ratatouille again? Like, a, not everyone can be a paleontologist, but a paleontologist can come from everywhere. That's what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You got it.
Yeah. And just kind of like a little personal anecdote of how I've seen that sort of play itself out in my personal life. You know, uh, I do these outreach projects, or I work with people who are doing these outreach projects, and they're all very fun. They're all really cool, but a lot of times it's like encounters that I meet someone once, I meet a student once, and then that's kind of it, because I'm not a teacher at their school. I'm not someone who's kind of persistent in their life. Um, but recently, within my own family, I was talking to my older sister, who's got two daughters, my nieces. They're really awesome. They're probably the two coolest people I know. And Jaslene and Viviani, hey, I don't know if you're watching, but your uncle's proud of you and he misses you. But
Ruthless in Smash Brothers.
hey man, players gotta play. But my sister was telling me that my oldest niece Jasleen, she had this project where she was it was like a back to school project, and she was talking, or she had to make this poster where she was like, oh, these are my interests, this is what I like about school, this is what I like to do in my free time, yada yada. And she had a box in there where it was like, this is my hero. And it's kind of funny because, like, I haven't lived since I've moved around for school. I haven't lived at home in a while, and so although I'm very much a constant figure in their life, I'm not physically there all the time. So I just would have assumed that it would have been like someone else. Um, my sister sends me this picture, and she's like, "Hey, look who your niece chose as your hero." And she put a picture of me,
Oh.
and it was actually the same picture that you use for sort of my little. It's me sitting on top of this mountain in Ghost Ranch, New Mexico, and
Oh. Everybody's
and
crying in the chat now.
well, it was just really cool because, like, again, sometimes you meet a student, sometimes you meet someone at an event, and you see them once, and then you kind of hope that you had an impact, and you try to find a metric to assess whether it was positive, whether it was negative, how did people feel before and after, are they more encouraged, are they going to go to a museum afterwards? And that's all really cool, and those things are really important, for people who work in museums and who are doing outreach and education. It's sort of how we can prove that we're making an impact. But in like a day-to-day thing, um, I just, to see it with my niece, and not only is she like super, uh, not only was it super cool that she put me as your hero, but then afterwards, my sister told me, she's like, yeah, dude, she reads a lot. She reads a lot and she wants to know about the world. She'll send me a picture of a rock. She'll be like, hey, what is this? And I'll be like, oh, I'll try to figure it out. Um, but it's just really cool to see that impact so close to home.
Oh yeah.
And uh, I think that that's now that I know she's super interested and she loves science. She likes doing math, which she's a cool
Good for
kid.
her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I was about to say, I was like, she's a cool kid, but I don't think her and I would have like connected on that if we were both the same age. Because when I was her age, I was not good at math. Um, Still working on it, but yeah, just to see it so close to home and see her really encouraged by it. Now, what I want to do is like, okay, well, your uncle's a scientist, but let me connect you to all these really amazing women who are doing paleontology. So I've shown her some of the stuff that Brittany's doing, some of the stuff that Michelle's doing, some of the stuff that like Caroline Abbott has done, who was here earlier. It's just like there's yeah, I mean, like that's what I mean by paying it forward. Like I see the impact that of what I'm doing has had on sort of uh, those who are close to me. I just want to keep doing more stuff like that. That's why education is so important. Um, yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Isaac. I think this was a really important talk on multiple levels.
Thank you. Yeah, it was fun. Had a lot of fun.
Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for joining us for today's Fossil Friday chats. Hopefully you were able to catch both of them. Again, as always, these are archived into video, so if you'd like to rewatch them, feel free. And again, we'll have another set of Fossil Friday web chats next week. And should you wish to, we will have links for you to be able to support both the Western Science Center and the Raymond M. Alf Museum during our closures, if you feel so inclined as to support our various programs, including programs like this. So thank you, everyone, and we will see you next week.
Bye. Bye,
Bye.
Isaac. Good seeing you.
Good seeing you too.
Stay safe. Move back from Chicago. I hate it. Just kidding. Bye.